The penthouse was too clean. That was the first thing Kang Do-yeon noticed when he walked through the door. Still wearing the exhaustion of a 14-hour flight, like a second skin. He had been overseas for 3 weeks. 3 brutal weeks of negotiations and shareholder meetings and the endless grinding machinery of corporate damage control. His father had made a mess. The board had made them. Do-yeon had been the one sent to clean it all up the way he was always the one sent to clean things up. He had not slept more than 4 hours on any given night. He had not eaten a proper meal in days. His temper, never particularly stable, was frayed to the breaking point, and all he had been thinking about during the entire flight home. Ha-Jun. Not that he would have admitted that out loud. Kang Do-yeon did not admit things. He did not express longing or loneliness or the quiet, persistent ache of missing someone who had become so woven into the fabric of his life that he didn't know how to exist without them. But the thought of Ha-Jun had been there anyway, buried beneath the spreadsheets and the contracts and the cold fury he felt toward his father. The thought of Ha-Jun's steady presence, Ha-Jun's quiet voice, the way Ha-Jun would look up from whatever book he was reading when Do-jeon came home, his eyes softening in that particular way that Do-jeon had never seen anyone else do. The way Ha-Jun always left tea warming on the counter, even when Do-jeon was hours late. The way Ha-Jun's slippers were always by the door, slightly crooked, as if he had kicked them off in a hurry. The slippers were gone. Do-jeon noticed that first, standing in the entranceway, with a suitcase still in his hand and his coat still on his shoulders. The space by the door, where Ha-Jun's slippers always sat, was empty, just bare floor, polished to a cold gleam. He stepped further inside. The apartment was silent in a way it had never been silent before. Not the peaceful silence of an empty room, but the hollow, echoing silence of a place that had been abandoned. The kitchen counter was bare. No tea, no covered plate of food left warming in the oven. No small, handwritten notes propped against the fruit bowl. Don't forget your meeting at 2. There's leftover jjigae in the fridge, or I hope your day was okay. Do-jeon had never responded to those notes. He had read them, absorbed them, filed them away in some quiet corner of his mind. But he had never once thanked Ha-Jun for them. It had never occurred to him that one day they might stop. He moved through the apartment like a man walking through a dream. The living room was pristine. Not messy empty, not lived in empty, but cleaned empty, the kind of empty that suggested someone had deliberately removed every trace of themselves. The books that usually lay half open on the couch were gone. The soft throw blanket Ha-Jun always wrapped around himself on cold evenings was folded and placed in the closet, as if it had never been used. The small collection of photographs that had once lined the shelves, photographs of Ha-Jun's family, of places he had traveled before they met, of the two of them together at a company event where Do-jeon had reluctantly allowed himself to be captured on film, were gone. The shelves were bare. It was the key that broke him, sitting alone on the kitchen counter. Small, silver, utterly unremarkable. The key Do-yeon had given Ha-Jun 2 years ago, on a night when Ha-Jun had been staying over more and more frequently, and Do-jeon had finally, gruffly, without meeting his eyes, said, "You should have your own. It's inefficient to keep buzzing you up." Ha-Jun had taken the key with both hands, the way someone might accept something precious, and he had smiled in that quiet, private way that always made Do-yeon's chest feel strangely tight. Now the key was sitting on the counter, alone, beneath the cold kitchen lights. Do-yeon stared at it for a long time. His mind, usually so quick to analyze and strategize and calculate, had gone completely blank. He picked up the key, turned it over in his palm. The metal was cold. "Ah-Jun." His voice came out rougher than he intended. It echoed through the empty apartment and returned to him unanswered. He called again, louder this time. "Ah-Jun." Nothing, just silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. His first thought was that Ha-Jun was angry. That made sense. Do-jeon had been gone for 3 weeks with barely any contact, a few curt texts, one brief phone call that had been interrupted by a meeting. Ha-Jun had probably been upset. He had probably decided to stay with a friend for a few days, to make a point, to force Do-jeon to notice his absence. It was immature, but it was understandable. Do-yeon would call him, and Ha-Jun would come back, and everything would return to normal. That was how these things worked. He pulled out his phone and dialed Ha-Jun's number. The line didn't ring. A robotic voice informed him that the number was no longer in service. Do-yeon frowned. He tried again. Same result. A cold tendril of unease began to curl in his stomach. He opened his messages, scrolling back through their conversation thread, and that was when he saw it. Dozens of messages from Ha-Jun, spanning the 3 weeks Do-yeon had been gone. All unread, all unanswered. Do-jeon scrolled up, his thumb moving faster and faster, and he saw the progression of Ha-Jun's desperation written in text on his screen. Day 1. I hope your flight was okay. Call me when you land. Day 2. Hey, I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Just wanted to check in. Is everything alright? Day 4. Do-yeon, I'm starting to get worried. Please just let me know you're okay. Day 7. I went to the office today. They wouldn't let me in. Did I do something wrong? Day 10. I saw the news. The engagement. I understand now. I wish you had told me yourself, but I understand. Day 14. If this is your choice, I won't fight it. I never expected anything from you. I hope she makes you happy. Day 21. I'm leaving the key on the counter. Please take care of yourself. Du-Yan read the last message 3 times. His hand had begun to shake. If this is your choice, I won't fight it. The words were so gentle, so unbearably gentle. Even in the moment of his complete devastation, Ha-Jun had been kind. He hadn't screamed, hadn't accused, hadn't demanded explanations or apologies or anything at all. He had simply accepted what he believed to be true and removed himself from Du-Yan's life with the same quiet grace he had brought to everything. Du-Yon lowered the phone. His throat was tight. His chest was burning with something he didn't have a name for. He went to the bedroom, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, and he threw open the closet doors. Ha-Jun's clothes were gone. Not all of them the expensive pieces Du-Jon had bought for him over the years were still there, folded neatly, as if Ha-Jun had been careful not to take anything that didn't belong to him. But his own clothes, the simple sweaters, the worn jeans, the soft cotton shirts he had ironed long before they met were missing. The dresser drawers were half empty. The bathroom counter was bare of Ha-Jun's toothbrush, his skincare products, the small, ordinary items that had accumulated over years of shared living. Du-Young stood in the center of the empty bedroom, his hands trembling at his sides. And for the first time in his adult life, Kang Du-Yan felt something that was very close to terror. The investigation began that night. Du-Yan did not sleep. He called Ha-Jun's phone again and again, hoping for a different result, but the number remained disconnected. He checked Ha-Jun's social media accounts, only to find that every single one had been deactivated. He called Ha-Jun's emergency contacts, a distant cousin, an old college friend, but neither of them had heard from Ha-Jun in weeks. The friend sounded worried. The cousin sounded confused. He said he was moving. The cousin said, he didn't say where. I thought you knew. Do-Young hung up and stared at the wall for a very long time. At dawn, he called the company's head of security. Find him, he said, his voice cold and controlled, and utterly unlike the chaos churning inside him. I don't care what it takes. Find Han Ha-Jun. The security team began their work tracing phone records, checking financial transactions, following the thin digital trail that every person left behind in the modern world. But Ha-Jun had been careful. The phone was disconnected. The bank account had been closed after a single full withdrawal. The social media was gone. It was as if Han Ha-Jun had simply ceased to exist, and Du-Yang was left holding nothing but the ghost of a life he had never fully appreciated. It was 3 days later that Du-Yang learned the truth about what had happened while he was gone. He called Mingji, his personal assistant, into his office. She arrived with her tablet and her professional smile, and Du-Jian asked her a single question. Did Ha-Jun come to the office while I was away? Minji's smile flickered. Just for a moment, just enough. He came once, she said carefully. I told him you were unavailable. Did you tell the guards not to let him in? Her face went pale. I was following instructions, she said. Your father, the board. They said. The engagement announcement was sensitive. They said no one outside the family should be involved. They said, get out. Du-Jian's voice was quiet. It was more terrifying than if he had screamed. Minji flied. The engagement. Du-Young closed his eyes and pressed his palms against his desk, and he let himself feel the full, nauseating weight of what had happened. His father, desperate to stabilize the company after a series of financial setbacks, had negotiated a strategic alliance with another conglomerate. The announcement had been made while Do-Young was overseas, timed deliberately to coincide with his absence so he couldn't interfere. There was no romance. There was no relationship. Du-Jian had never even met the Omega in question. He had been fighting the alliance for months, working behind the scenes to kill the deal before it became public. And he had been so close, so agonizingly close, to succeeding. But the announcement had gone out before he could stop it. And Ha-Jun had seen it. Ha-Jun had seen a headline and a photograph, and had believed, completely and understandably, that he had been discarded. Du-Jian sat at his desk as the morning light crept across the floor, and he thought about Ha-Jun, reading that article alone in the apartment. Ha-Jun, who had called and been met with silence. Ha-Jun, who had gone to the company for answers and been turned away at the door. Ha-Jun, who had believed that the man he loved had chosen someone else and hadn't even thought he deserved a goodbye. The hospital receipt changed everything. Du-Jian found it a week into his search. While going through the apartment one final time, it was tucked inside a book that Ha-Jun had left behind on the nightstand, a pregnancy guide. Its pages dog-eared and annotated in Ha-Jun's neat handwriting. The receipt was for a prenatal checkup. The date was 3 weeks before Ha-Jun had disappeared. Du-Yan stared at the receipt for a long time. Then he opened the nightstand drawer and found the prenatal vitamins, hidden behind a box of tissues. Then he found the ultrasound appointment card, tucked into the pages of the book. He calculated the date, the last night they had spent together. The night Du-Yan had held Ha-Jun in the darkness and said, "You're the only one who doesn't expect anything from me. Hajun had been pregnant then, already pregnant, carrying Do-yeon's child, and Do-yeon, blind and careless and so certain that his silence was strength, had let him walk away, believing he was unloved. Do-yeon sat down on the bedroom floor, slowly, like an old man, like someone whose body could no longer support the weight of what he was carrying. He held the ultrasound printout in his hands. It had been wedged into the pages of the book, a grainy, black and white image of something that was barely more than a suggestion of a shape, and he stared at it. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. In the image, barely visible, was the tiny curve of a head, the suggestion of limbs, a life. His child. Hajun's child. The child Hajun was carrying alone somewhere in the vast, indifferent world, believing he had been abandoned. A sound escaped Do-yeon's throat. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a sob. It was something raw and broken and utterly involuntary. The sound of a man who had spent his entire life believing he was incapable of being wounded and was now discovering exactly how wrong he had been. He sat there on the bedroom floor, the ultrasound clutched in his trembling hands, and for the first time since he was a child, Kang Do-yeon cried, not gracefully, not quietly. His shoulders heaved with the force of it, and the tears burned down his face, and he did not try to stop them, because Hajun was out there somewhere, pregnant and alone and believing he had been thrown away, and Do-yeon had no one to blame but himself. The months that followed were the worst of Kang Do-yeon's life. He hired private investigators, the best money could buy, and he threw himself into the search with the same relentless intensity he had once reserved for corporate acquisitions. He traced Hajun's financial records, followed the trail of his single bank withdrawal to a bus station in a city 3 hours south. He obtained security footage from the station that showed Hajun fainted, and Do-yeon remembered, his face drawn with exhaustion, a heavy coat draped over a body that was just beginning to show the subtle swell of pregnancy. The footage was grainy and brief, but Do-yeon watched it 100 times, his fingers pressed against the screen as if he could reach through the glass and pull Hajun back. He followed leads that went nowhere. He canvassed clinics and hospitals in every city along the bus route, showing Hajun's photograph to receptionists and nurses who shook their heads with practiced sympathy. He lost weight. He stopped sleeping. The dark circles under his eyes became permanent, and his temper, already legendary, sharpened into something genuinely frightening. The people who worked for him learned to stay out of his way. Meanwhile, in a small city far from Seoul, Hajun was surviving. He worked exhausting shifts at a small textile shop, his growing belly hidden beneath oversized sweaters and loose jackets. He fainted once, in his 5th month, from the combination of overwork and malnutrition, and a coworker had to call an ambulance. He woke up in a hospital bed, the same kind of hospital bed he had woken up in when he first learned he was pregnant, and the nurse who checked his vitals had looked at him with such gentle concern that Hajun had almost broken down right there. "Is there someone we can call for you?" the nurse asked. "No," Hajun whispered. "There's no one." At night, in the cramped studio apartment he could barely afford, he would lie on his narrow bed and whisper to the child growing inside him. "We're going to be okay," he would say, his hand pressed against his stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that grew stronger every week. "It's just you and me. We don't need anyone else." But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, he would allow himself to remember the way Do-yeon's voice had softened during that last night together, the way Do-yeon had held him, really held him, as if he was something precious. The way Do-yeon's eyes had looked in the dim light, not cold, not distant, but almost tender. Hajun would clutch those memories close and then force them away. He chose someone else, he reminded himself. He made his choice, and I made mine. The birth happened on a rainy Tuesday night. Hajun labored for 12 hours in a small public hospital, gripping the edges of the bed and biting his lip until it bled, refusing to scream because he had trained himself not to draw attention. The nurse who stayed with him through the worst of it was a beta woman with gray-streaked hair and hands that were impossibly gentle. She held Hajun's hand when the pain became unbearable, and she didn't ask about the absent alpha, the missing partner, the ring finger that was conspicuously bare. "You're doing so well," she said, her voice steady and kind. "Just a little more. You're almost there." When they placed the baby on his chest, tread and screaming and impossibly small, Hajun looked down at the tiny, furious face and felt something inside him splinter and reform. The baby had Do-yeon's eyes, dark and sharp and already observing the world with an intensity that was almost unnerving. The baby had Do-yeon's features, the same stubborn jaw and delicate brow, and looking at him was like looking at a ghost. "At least you're here," Hajun whispered, tears sliding down his cheeks and mingling with the sweat of his labor. "At least I have you." He named the baby Yoon, and he loved him with a ferocity that surprised even himself. Do-yeon found them when Yoonwoo was 5 months old. The lead came from a Clinica prenatal record that matched Hajun's description, a birth certificate registered in a small city hospital. Do-yeon drove through the night to reach the address listed on the file, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. The apartment building was modest, slightly run down, The kind of place Duyan would never have looked twice at in his previous life. He climbed the stairs slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him, and he stopped in front of the door marked 304. He knocked. The door opened, and there was Hajuin. Different, thinner. The softness, Duyan remembered, was still there, but it had been tempered by something harder. He was holding a baby on his hip, a baby with dark, curious eyes and a tiny fist clutching Hajun's shirt. Duyan looked at the baby, and the baby looked back at him, and the world stopped. The baby had his eyes, his features, his stubborn, solemn expression. Duyan's legs nearly gave out. His hands were trembling so violently, he had to brace one against the doorframe. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He had prepared 1,000 things to say during the months of searching. Apologies and explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. But none of them mattered now. All he could do was stare at the child, his child, and try to remember how to breathe. Hajun, he finally managed, and his voice came out broken in a way he had never heard before. You did all of this alone. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was pure, absolute devastation. Hajun's expression flickered surprise, then weariness, then something that looked almost like pain, but he didn't close the door. The conversation that followed was the hardest of both their lives. They sat in Hajun's tiny living room. Yunwoo cradled in Hajun's lap, and Hajun finally said everything he had been holding back for over a year. His voice was quiet but steady. I called you dozens of times. Every day for 3 weeks. You never answered. Duyang flinched. I went to the company. They turned me away. Your own guards wouldn't let me through the door. Duyang closed his eyes. I saw the engagement announcement, the photograph, the way you were standing beside her, and I realized I had been fooling myself the entire time. Hajun's voice finally cracked. You didn't even give me one word. One word, Duyan. After everything, you couldn't even tell me it was over. Duyang told him everything. His voice was rough and raw and utterly without its usual control. He told Hajun about his father's machinations, the forced alliance, the way the announcement had been timed while he was overseas. He told Hajun about Minch, about the blocked calls and the denied entry and the instructions from the board. He told him that there had never been a relationship, never been a romance, never been anyone except Hajun. I was trying to kill the deal, Duyan said, and his voice broke on the words. I was trying to come back to you, but by the time I got home, you were already gone. Hajun listened in silence. When Duyan finished, he looked down at Yunhua, the small, solemn face that was so clearly, painfully, Duyan's end. He was quiet for a long time. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Duyan said, and his voice was steadier now, though his hands were still trembling. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything, but I'm asking you to let me stay, not as he swallowed, not as anything except his father. Let me be here. Let me learn how to take care of him. Let me earn the place I threw away. Hajun looked at him, at this alpha who had broken his heart so completely, who had searched for him for months, who was sitting on his threadbare couch with tears tracking silently down his face, and he thought about all the nights he had whispered to Yunwoo in the darkness, promising him that they would be okay alone. Maybe they didn't have to be alone. Okay, Hajun said quietly, but you have to prove it every day. You don't get to disappear again. I won't, Duyang said. I swear I won't. It took months. Duyan was awkward with infants. He had never held a baby before Yunwoo, and the first time Hajun placed the baby in his arms, Dujian looked so terrified that Hajun almost laughed despite everything. But Dujian learned. He showed up every single day, arriving in the morning and staying until late at night, learning to feed and change and soothe a crying infant. He was clumsy and uncertain and completely without his usual cold authority, and Hajun watched him struggle with something that felt almost like hope. One evening, when Yunghoo was 7 months old, he laughed for the first time. It was a small, bubbling sound, completely unexpected, and it happened while Dujian was holding him. Dujian froze, his eyes going wide, and he looked at Hajun with an expression of such pure, unguarded wonder that Hajun felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. He laughed. Dujian breathed, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He laughed at me. Hajun's lips twitched. He probably thinks your face is funny. And Dujian, the most powerful alpha in Seoul's financial district, laughed too, a real laugh, surprise out of him. The kind of laugh Hajun had never heard before. That night, after Yunwoo was asleep, Duyan and Hajun sat together on the small balcony of the apartment, looking out at the city lights. I'm not asking you to love me again, Dujian said quietly. I know I destroyed that, but I want you to know that he stopped, swallowed. I love you. I think I've loved you for a long time. I was just too broken to say it. Hajun didn't answer immediately, but later that night, when Dujian was rocking Yunwoo to sleep by the dim bedside lamp, Hajun stood in the doorway and watched them. The man who had once been too cold to hold him, the man who had searched for him for months, the man who was now cradling their son with a gentleness that seemed to surprise even himself. For the first time, Hajun thought, he wasn't asking me to wait. He was the one staying, and maybe that was enough.
So that was it for this video. Let's talk about it. Doyon finally found them. Okay, and I'm not gonna lie. Watching the coldest man alive break down over an ultrasound, yeah, that hit different, okay. But let's be real, he messed up bad. 3 weeks of silence, ignored calls, let his own people block Hajun, and not one message explaining the engagement mess. Like you can be busy, but you have to like make time for your loved one. But no, he chose silence, and Hajun chose dignity. Now here's where I give him credit. He didn't like just show up with excuses. He stayed, and that's the difference between regret and actually showing up. Okay, quick reality check because the story nails it. Silence in a relationship isn't natural, it's loud, and most of the time it sounds like rejection. Harjun didn't like leave because Doyon was busy. He left because he felt unchosen. Like you can't be in a relationship where you don't feel like you are in it. If you are feel like you are alone in that relationship putting all the effort, just leave it. So yeah, second chance maybe, but and slowly, very slowly. What about you, letting him back in or locking that door for the good? Okay, so that was it for this story. Just make sure you're subscribed. See you in the next one. Seriously, seriously, answer your partner's call. Give give all the credit back. That's the least you can do. Okay, that was it. Bye bye.